Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into the deeply personal, frankly wild story of a man whose entire worldview was flipped completely upside down by a single hidden book. Today we're unpacking the fascinating testimony of Stuart. He's a Jewish guy born and raised in the Bronx, and we'll follow his unexpected, decades-long journey to discovering what he firmly believes to be his Messiah. Let me tell you, it's a story packed with dramatic pivots, profound questions, and honestly, a whole lot of unexpected twists.
Now you might be wondering, who said this? Well, these incredibly intense words were actually spoken by our subject, Stuart, to his absolute best friend. And why? Simply because his buddy came over one day, opened the Old Testament to the book of Isaiah, and suggested that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. For a young Jewish kid steeped in his heritage, this idea wasn't just wrong, it was deeply enraging. Stuart literally threw his best friend out of the house, effectively ending their relationship for years.
But here's the kicker. Before being shoved out the door, that best friend managed to pull off something incredibly sneaky. He secretly stashed a small, green Gideon's New Testament right into Stuart's sock drawer. Now, Stuart did spot the book after kicking his friend out, but he'd grown up believing the New Testament was cursed. So, using just the tips of his fingers, he pushed it to the very back of the drawer, wrapped it up in socks, and just left it there, in the dark. It was basically a hidden seed, waiting quietly.
Let's track Stuart's teen years for a second, because we see this rapid, jarring journey from a spiritually curious kid to a fully defiant rebel. At his bar mitzvah at age 13, he made this sincere, heartfelt promise to find God. But by 14, he made a very conscious decision to just go his own way. And get this, by the time he was 15 and 16, this heavy-drinking teenager had surprisingly become a drug supplier for a community of older adults. Talk about a detour, right?
To be fair, Stuart wasn't exactly rebelling against God himself. He was actually reacting to the glaring, in-your-face hypocrisy he saw in the religious leaders around him. I mean, he looked at these glittery Torah scrolls and felt they were just empty, completely devoid of God's actual presence. He had a blind Hebrew teacher who would literally smoke during class. And the most painful part, at his own grandmother's funeral, a rabbi refused to leave until Stuart's father handed him cash via a secret handshake. You can see how this empty religion just completely shattered his trust.
Seeking his own path, Stuart's life takes a major turn when he becomes deeply attached to an older divorced Catholic woman and her two kids. He actually stepped up as this wholesome father figure, taking the kids to the park, truly falling in love with the family. But there was a catch. The mother was hanging out with a much older crowd of hippies from her neighborhood, and that is exactly how a teenage Stuart ended up supplying drugs to a group of 20 and 30-somethings. It's a crazy juxtaposition. Fast forward a bit, and a massive shock hits Stuart's life. Out of nowhere, his girlfriend converts to Christianity and completely changes her lifestyle. She flat out refuses to marry him unless he shares her faith, but, and this is crucial, she totally respects his refusal to read the New Testament. So, remarkably, they start spending up to 12 hours a day together doing nothing but reading the Old Testament and scouring over 100 messianic prophecies. And they kept this intense, non-stop study up for 13 months.
All of this created the ultimate contrast that really began to shatter Stuart's worldview. On one hand, you have his memories of the empty, hypocritical religious routines of his youth. But on the other hand, he was witnessing genuine, totally unexplainable transformation right in front of his eyes. His girlfriend's 9-year-old son, who is notoriously difficult and rebellious, suddenly accepted his mom's faith and transformed overnight into a respectful, peaceful kid. Stuart knew a child couldn't just fake that kind of deep internal change. And the transformation of this young boy went even further. Stuart had bought the kid a very expensive flute. Seeing this formerly troubled kid just pick up that flute and play church hymns perfectly, without a single musical lesson, was mind-blowing for Stuart. For him, it proved that this wasn't just human willpower or some clever psychological trick. It was undeniably what he called a God thing. So driven by this undeniable proof that God was actively working, Stuart reluctantly agreed to attend a local church. And there, a Jewish pastor named Gary was preaching. Gary kept pointing his finger, and to Stuart, it felt like he was pointing directly at his chest. The pastor challenged the crowd, saying that people can intellectually believe in a Messiah in their heads, but lack the heart-level surrender and personal sacrifice needed to truly connect with God. Stuart felt completely exposed. He knew the pastor was describing him to a T.
Okay, now comes a string of events that you almost wouldn't believe if they were written into a Hollywood script.
Check this out. Stuart falls asleep meditating on the train ride home from work. He wakes up, jumps off the train, only to realize he's in Brooklyn, not the Bronx. It just so happens to be a Tuesday night, and he's right next to a church holding a Bible study. He walks in, and a Jewish man there explains to him that the new covenant promised by the prophet Jeremiah is in fact the New Testament.
Realizing what the New Testament truly was, it hits Stuart like a ton of bricks. He has one. He endures an agonizing hour and 45-minute local train ride all the way back to his house in the Bronx. He literally sprints inside, tears through his sock drawer, and pulls out that little green Gideon Bible. You guys, it had been waiting there in the dark for 7 long years, ever since the very day he threatened to kill his best friend. Crazy, right?
After all those hours studying the Old Testament with his girlfriend, Stuart finally opens that little green Bible to the very first line, Matthew 1:1. He reads the genealogy connecting Jesus directly to King David and Abraham. In a split second, the Jewish lineage he had studied for thousands of hours perfectly bridged the gap to the New Testament.
Stuart actually uses this incredible puzzle metaphor to describe the sheer explosive instant of his paradigm shift. He says it was like throwing 500 loose jigsaw pieces onto a table, blinking, and seeing the entire picture perfectly assembled in 3 seconds flat. The moment he read that first verse, all his doubts just vanished. The scriptures flawlessly aligned in his mind, and he finally understood that Jesus was the Messiah he had been searching for since he was 13 years old.
But we have to remember, this profound realization came with a surprisingly heavy personal cost. Shortly after accepting his new faith, Stuart felt a deep, undeniable internal calling from God. He was told he could be a good husband to his girlfriend, or he could fully dedicate his life to serving God, but he couldn't do both. Over the next year and a half, Stuart made the heartbreaking decision to end his relationship with the very woman who had helped lead him to faith in the first place. That heartbreaking decision, though, launched an extraordinary 40-plus-year journey. The once angry teen from the Bronx graduated from Bible school. He initially tried to avoid ministering to his own people by serving Native American tribes in Louisiana, but God steered him right back. Since 1984, he has served full-time with Jews for Jesus, planted congregations all up and down the East Coast, and today he fiercely continues a digital chat ministry even while battling severe congestive heart failure.
Throughout his massive ministry, Stuart has championed this amazing concept for his disciples, encouraging them to become what he calls gospel fluent. What does that mean? It's about internalizing the core message of forgiveness and redemption so deeply that sharing it becomes entirely second nature. Just like speaking a native language, you don't have to overthink the words. It simply flows naturally out of you to whoever needs to hear it.
And his trust in God's provision showed up in incredible, almost impossible ways. Early in his ministry, Stuart and his wife desperately needed a $1,500 refrigerator, but simply couldn't afford it. Then, out of nowhere, a surprising church sent a surprise check from a children's collection. Stuart expected maybe $13. Instead, the check covered the exact cost of the refrigerator, the delivery fee, the removal of the old unit, and even the driver's tip, literally down to the exact penny. No way you can make that up.
But perhaps the most touching moment of Stuart's timeline happened 2 years into his ministry. While traveling in California, he actually managed to track down that best friend. Yeah, the one he had threatened to kill and thrown out of his house. When they finally met for dinner, his friend was overflowing with tears of absolute joy, totally overwhelmed to see that the little green Bible he had bravely hidden in his sock drawer so many years ago had actually bloomed.
As we wrap up Stuart's incredible story, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. It's based on a promise from the prophet Jeremiah that Stuart clung to during his own deep search. When you search for me with all your heart, you will find me. Looking at Stuart's unbelievable journey from a disillusioned rebel to a deeply fulfilled man, it really makes you wonder, if you searched for the truth with all your heart, what would you find? Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.